Hello, everybody. So the other day we kind of looked at a little bit more putting the HTML tags together. That's very repetitive. We'll see the same thing over and over and over again. So every week we get more and more practice with that. But the essential concept is there. We have those, we surround the actual data we want to show on the page with the opening and closing tags, which define what type of thing it is. And we'll see more and more types of things as the semester progresses. And we also have started looking at some standalone tags where there's not really data included. It's just information that the computer's going to do things in the background, such as link to a CSS sheet. So we're able to start making things look a little bit nicer. And that's kind of the idea for today. We're just going to continue that and make things look a little bit nicer. Starting off with colors. Before we get started, did anybody have any questions about anything so far?
Not yet.
No.
Okay. Okay, so color theory is a huge branch of psychology. Y'all have probably heard some of it before, right? Like red tends to get people in an active state, makes people want to buy more.
Calming.
That's that's why like McDonald's or Wendy's, so many restaurants have that red on their sign because that color affects people's minds. Or you may have heard, I guess it's been going on for about 25 years now, they paint jail cells pink because it calms people down. But in our society, most people are probably aware of that, right? That colors have an impact on people. So it can be kind of a big deal. And you can just go to Google and search like color theory or color psychology. And there's just huge, tons and tons of information about it and how they interact with each other. But the main thing for right now, what we're going to be doing is just looking at applying colors. So on the example, I'm probably going to pick colors kind of randomly, so they're not going to look so nice together, but the concept is how to apply colors. We'll talk about some design stuff next week, I believe. A little bit more into mixing the colors, but just be aware of that and maybe do a little bit of research on some different color theories, how some of the basics about how colors affect people. Yeah, they've been doing that for years. Something in the chat popped up about the jail cell thing I mentioned. They started that about 25 years ago, and it had a noticeable calming effect on people. Not like bright hot pink, that would have a different effect, but the very very soft one that's like a very soft pink color tends to calm people down. And it has a huge effect on people. So it's definitely something to look into if you're going to be doing a lot of the design aspects on websites. You'll want to be familiar with that. But I mostly just wanted to mention it. For our purposes here, there's a lot of ways we can ask for colors on a web page, and we're going to look at an example. I'm going to list them out first. The first one is what we've already seen in class a couple times because that's a quick, easy one that makes sense to a lot of people starting out, and that's by name. We can just type the word green or steel blue or cobalt. There's a huge list of names. So that's one advantage of it. It's a huge list of named colors already. That way we can, kind of like the box of Crayola crowns when we're little kids and learning our colors. We learn all those names, and there's hundreds of them available to ask for. Not every single color is named, so we don't have access to the entire color spectrum. There's still a lot of colors that we can get to that we don't have names for. Another advantage of this is, I'm going to write Intellisense. That's the little predictive things. Whenever we're typing and that box pops up to try and predict what word we're going to type, so we can just hit tab and not have to type the whole thing out. Avoid making typos that way. if we're using the names of colors, the computer can predict what color name we want. So that's kind of an advantage. I should put little plus signs by those because those are good points on them. A big disadvantage of that, though, is it will look different machine to machine. I'll kind of abbreviate that. It will look different machine to machine because with the name colors, there's a whole lot of comparison going on in the background and a lot of background code to connect the aspects of that color to a particular name. And little subtle differences between the machines can make a big difference when there's a whole lot of processing going on. But it will be consistent. So like if you have two colors that match, I don't know, like steel blue and forest green, I don't know if those actually match or not, but let's say that shade of green and that shade of blue match on the computer where you're putting it together. When you put a website together with those colors and then open it on another machine, it will look slightly different, but they will still match. So if the names match, they're going to match on whatever machine you go to, but it looks slightly different. So for something like a company logo, where there's an official company color, you might want to avoid the names because that's not going to be consistent. I guess for the second one on the list, I'll put the one I use most often, hexadecimal. And that's where we have values of 0 to 255 for red, green, and blue in hex digits. So whenever we need to work directly in binary is really hard for humans to work with, right? 11010011. A whole lot of bits that we'd be looking at. It's going to kind of overwhelming when humans work at it. We need more symbols, more than just two symbols. So hexadecimal is base 16, and we can take our bits in groups of 4. If we take 4 bits at a time, we go right to the hex bits. So what is this? 8 plus 4 is 12, 13, which in hex we use 0 through 9 for the first 10 digits. So then A would be 10, and I always just count it on my hand because we only need the 5 fingers after that. So A is 10, then B, C, D, E, F. So 13, B, C is going to be a D. And what is this? 2 plus 1 is 3, which would just still be a 3. So instead of working with those 8 bits, we can just write D3, and it makes it a lot easier. So anytime you're working in hex,
I definitely have to do a refresher on binary. We did that right in the beginning. I think of computing logic. So I remember I thought I had it, and then it was like as soon as it came, it went. So I have to brush up on that.
Okay, why don't we refresh it real quick? Just a quick pass at it. So we're used to base 10, right? Humans have 10 fingers, so that's a good number for us to work with. We can count things on our fingers. So let's say we had 123 in base 10. And we know what those numbers are. We know what that means because of the columns, right? That really means 100 in this column plus 20 in this column plus 3 in this column. That sound familiar, Tiff?
Okay, yes. Thank you, yes.
And the base 10 means that we're basing all of our numbers off 10. So these columns, this one over here that just means 1, that's really 10 to the 0 power. Just a rule in mathematics, any number raised to the 0 power is a 1. And our second column is 10 to the 1st power. And the third column is 10 squared and 10 cubed, 10 to the 4th, and so on. We just increase the powers of 10. So this 100 really means we have 1 10 squared. And 20, that 2 in that column means we have 2 10 to the 1st power. And 3 means we have 3 10 to the 0 power, which would be a 1. But there is nothing special about 10. We can use any number we want. And a lot of different numbers have been used, but for machines, we go with on-off states, which means base 2 is the most convenient because we either have something on or off. And in general, in this class, anytime I'm talking about binary, which doesn't show up much in this class, this is just a refresher since we're talking about hex. Anytime we're talking about binary, unless I state otherwise, a 1 will mean on and a 0 will mean off, but that is not a restriction, and it changes. It often changes in a machine. So like on the pixels on the screen, half of the pixels come on with a 1 and half of the pixels come on with a 0 because of the way we set screens up. So it's not consistent, but when we're talking about it theoretically, we typically use a 1 for on and 0 for off. But those are arbitrary symbols. And if we wanted to represent numbers, we can do the same thing we did with base 10 by splitting it up into columns. I'll use, well, just this 4 bits, that way we can write it quickly. That one row there, 0, 1, 1, 0, 1, the first 4 bits there. And it's in base 2, which means we only have 2 symbols, a 0 and a 1. And we take our base and raise to the 0 power for the first column, which again, any number raised to 0 power is a 1, and just increase that power. So our next column is 2 to the 1st power, then 2 squared, 2 cubed. So to find out what that number means, we can add up all these values. So we have 1 2 cubed, which is an 8, 1 2 squared, which is a 4. We don't have any 2s, and 1 2 to the 0, which is a 1. So 8 plus 2 plus 1 gives it, sorry, 8 plus 4 plus 1 gives us 13. So that's how we represent numbers. That kind of stir up some memories for everybody that's seen that before. Has everybody seen that before?
Yes.
Okay. If you have not seen that before, when you take SDEV 120 class, you'll spend like 2 weeks going over it and learning it in detail. So just kind of a quick review here, but that's what binary numbers represent. The problem with binary is that we're humans, right? 10 is a really good number for us to work with. We need more symbols. Some different ones throughout history. We use 10 because of our fingers. The Native Americans we call Mayans. That wasn't what they called themselves. That's what somebody named them long after they were gone. But they use 20 because they use their fingers and their toes. Ancient Babylon used 60 because we can count that on our fingers, just like we do. Have like 3 sections on each one of your fingers. So if you tap those, each section with your thumb, you can count up to 12, and then hold up a finger on the other hand. So you can either count to 12 5 times, or start with your fingers and count to 5 12 times, which is like a clock, right? And we could base the numbers off 60. So as humans, we need more than 2 symbols. We can handle a whole lot more than 2 symbols. So to find a number that works good, well, we need it to line up with binary so that it works directly with the machine. So it has to relate directly to 2, but base 2 is too small. So if we square that, we get base 4, which is still kind of small. We can handle a lot more numbers than that. Like I just pointed out, we can count to 60 on our fingers, and humans have easily, in the past, when that's the way people originally learned to count, they did fine with math on it. it just seems different to us because we learned to count with 10. So anything that's not 10 seems strange and foreign. Right? What we learned when we were little kids, that's what we base all our other knowledge off of. We can handle a lot more than 4 symbols, but it still has to be based off 2. So if we square that again, we get 16, which is closer to 10. It's more than 10 symbols, but not many more. So it's a good number for us to work with. And it's made up of all 2. That number is made up of all 2s, basically. 2 times 2 times 2 times 2 times 2. That's it. I think I said that one too many times. 2 times 2 times 2 times 2. Yeah. So the number is basically made up of all 2s. So it relates directly to binary. So obviously, we're talking about numbers. So for the first 10 digits, we start at 0, go up to 9. And then for our other 6, we just use the first 6 letters. So A through F, which I usually just like to count on my hands because A is going to be 10. So I usually start with all the fingers down. So A, B, C, D, E, F. And just count up the other ones. That way it doesn't take a lot of memorization. And then when we have a whole lot of bits to work with, we just split it up into chunks of 4. And 4 bits will count up to 16. So any hex digit automatically counts as 4 bits. So very quickly going over that. Any questions about those? Hopefully that was a review for everybody.
Okay, no, but I am happy to say that I was finally able to count to 60. I was missing the can't do it 5 times part because I was like, the other day I was like, man, I finally got it. Got it.
Yeah, you have to do both hands. It's probably better to think of it like a clock where we count to 5 12 times.
That is so cool.
Yeah, and it seems like a lot to us, but whenever people learned that when they were little kids, they had no problem working with it. So the only reason it seems strange to us is because we learned a much smaller system when we were young. But the key point for hex is anytime we're working in hex, we're actually working in binary. We're just working in binary 4 bits at a time. So when we do our colors in hexadecimal, we are directly feeding the machine language instructions in. So hexadecimal colors will always look the same no matter what machine we're on. That is directly, computers are made up of switches. When we're working in hex, you can think of it as we are actually flipping those switches. And that's the one that will be the same no matter what machine we're on. And to write that, I kind of ran out of room there at the bottom, but we write the pound sign, number sign, hashtag, whatever you want to call that symbol. We have lots of words for it anymore. But that followed by 2 red digits, 2 hex digits for red, 2 for green, and 2 for blue. And just the mix of them tells us what color it is. And you can, kind of mess around with it and kind of get used to mixing it, but color pickers are available. For now, I'm going to say just go to Google and put in color picker, and then it'll show this big palette with a bunch of different shades. You just pick the color you want and copy and paste the hex value in. But there is a color picker built into HTML. One of the tags we can put into an HTML page is a color picker. So when you're putting a page together, you can just throw a color picker right in there and copy the hex digits from that color picker. That's an even easier way, but it's still, I think we'll see that week 4. It's still a couple weeks away. Yeah, so that's the consistent one. So especially things like company colors, right? If you're doing a website for McDonald's, there's a very particular shade of red and a particular shade of yellow or gold or whatever that other color is that they're going to want you to use. And in that case, you would definitely want to use hexadecimal. That way it looks the same on every single machine. But, well, I just did that little spiel about hex. We do that because it's directly working with the machine. But it'd be nice to think like a human instead and just use base 10, right? So for that, I'm going to erase this little spot. So remember with the hex colors, use the hash, then 2 spots for red, 2 spots for green, and 2 spots for blue. Which I will quickly make a note of. It might be a little bit confusing, but you can also use one for each. If you do the hash and then 3 hex digits, that's like, say we had a color like 224477, where both red digits are the same, both blue digits are the same, both green digits are the same, both blue digits are the same. Then we could just do it with 3 digits if they're going to be the same. But that might confuse it, so I just wanted to very quickly make that note that it is possible. But for starting out here, just work with the six digits, because also that is what you use anytime in programming. That's the non-language specific. That is directly flipping the switches that make up a computer. So that's the one that's consistent across programming, which kind of also means that's the programmer one, right? And usually there's a graphic designer that'll be picking the colors. So the graphic designer probably didn't learn hexadecimal. Or maybe we just want to think like a human and use the numbers we've used since we were little kids. So for that, we can use Rgba. And it passes in like a function. So we'll pass in Rgba and then 3 spots, a red spot, a green spot, and a blue spot, all in base 10 numbers. So like 127, 34, 203. So passing in all base 10 numbers, and it's kind of a function. We will see all these in a moment. We're going to do an example and do all these. I just wanted to write them on the board. That way I can point at them whenever we're putting them in an example. But Rgba and then 3 base 10 numbers. That's the big advantage of those 3 base 10 values. That's going to make a big, solid, dense color, right? That's just going to make a solid color, fill everything in, and if things start overlapping, we'll only see that top color, right? So to go along with that, I'm going to keep it under number 3 because it's essentially the same. We also have Rgba. And these are lowercase. I have no idea why I just wrote that in uppercase. I'm sorry. Rgb. We want to spell that in lowercase. And we also have Rgba, where again, we will pass in 4 base 10 numbers. Again, 1 for red, some base 10 number for amount of green to mix in there, and some base 10 number for the amount of blue to mix in. And then the A here stands for alpha, which is how transparent it is. So alpha is a number of 0, which is fully transparent, to 1. So we pass that in as a percentage. So like a number, and then a percent. Something between 0 and 1 to say how transparent it is. So maybe like something like Rgba 24, 122, 28, 78%. So a little bit of red, quite a bit of green, just a little bit of blue, mix those colors together to whatever shade that makes. That would be a dark green. And then it's only 78% opaque, or what is that? Or 22% transparent. So we can see through it a little bit. And that gives us a way to back off the solid colors a little. And these are functions that we'll pass in. We'll see them in an example here in a moment. Again, I just wanted to put it there, but RGB and RGBA, we pass in 3 base 10 numbers. And then for the A, we pass in a % for an alpha value, something between 0 and 1.
What was that last thing you just said? You said something between 0 and 1?
Yes, some number between 0 and 1. So I wrote 78% there, and already 70. I started writing a number. So if we had 70%, that's actually 0.7, right? You remember that from math class?
Yes.
Numbers like this show up a whole lot in the world, but they're hard to say. So we have this % thing that makes them easier to say.
Okay.
And when we do that in CSS, we can do it either way. We can type the decimal or the %.
Okay.
But yeah, some sort of percentage number, a number between 0 and 1.
Right.
Or between nothing and 100% is a way that fits better in sentences. Okay. And we will see all these in just a moment. So the next one, there are several versions of it. Hsl. I'll write the L like that. And this one, yeah, along with HSL, which originally stood for hue, saturation, luminosity, somewhere along the line, people started saying different things. So half the time now you'll find hue, saturation, and lightness, but luminosity and lightness kind of mean the same thing. You'll also see HSV, which is hue, saturation, and value. Again, essentially the same thing. Or HSB for hue, saturation, and brightness, which I always thought that's the one that makes the most sense for that word, because that last letter represents how bright it is. Our book uses HSL, which uses the lightness thing, but the L originally stood for luminosity, so you might see that in some reference material as well. I don't know exactly when it changed, but yeah, if you go Google in it and start reading different things, you'll see it called both ways. But all of them will act the same. And hue is like the color that it is. That's what color we're picking. And essentially, it's like a wheel. This is the one that artists tend to prefer. I don't think colors will show up here. I have some colored chalk. Maybe it will. And also, I keep mentioning red, green, and blue, whereas you probably remember back in like elementary art school class, we'd always talk about red, blue, and yellow. Is everybody familiar with the difference between them? Like red, blue, and yellow, what we learn in elementary school art classes, that's for reflected light.
Colors? No, not green. Never mind. No, I was going to say primary colors, but never mind.
Yes, the primary colors that we learn in art class. We learn that with paints because that's reflected light. Like this piece of paper looks yellow because the light from my stage light sitting behind the computer hits that, then bounces off.
Oh,
and
like the ocean.
we see the color that is missing. When light bounces, reflected light, we see what's missing. So we mix red, yellow, and blue to control reflected colors. But with source colors, when we're seeing the color directly from the source light, like on the screen on the computer, right? we don't see what's missing, we see what is there. And to mix colors to get source lighting, we mix red, green, and blue. It's actually, source lighting really is red, green, and blue. And reflected lighting, we're actually mixing magenta, cyan, and yellow. But we learned that when we're little kids, so those words are kind of big for little kids.
That's why red, green, and blue are always in like photo editors and stuff. They always have the red, green, and the blue. Okay.
Yes, yes. If we're mixing light, like coming off light bulbs, we need bright red, bright green, and bright blue. And if we're mixing paints so that like light will hit it and reflect back, and we'll see the reflected color as light reflects off of it, then we mix magenta, cyan, and yellow. Which, as little kids, we learn red, blue, and yellow, because magenta is a shade of red and cyan's a shade of blue. But just in case you hadn't heard that before, that's why we always talk about RGB. So hue, saturation, and lightness is what most artists tend to prefer. The hue is what color is it, and it's like a wheel. If this color will show up. So like here at 0 degrees, we have red. Can you all see that? Does it look red? Probably not. But so we start at 0 degrees, and if we go all the way around the circle, we've gone 360 degrees around, right? So we go around the circle, 360 degrees, and down at like 120 degrees, so a third of the way around the circle, we hit green. As we keep coming around, another 120 would be about 240 degrees. And we get to blue. So the U value tells us how far around the circle we are. So some number between 0 and 360. Or really, we should say between 0 and 359, because when we get to 360, we're actually back to 0. And technically, we can keep going around and around and around the circle, but so a number between 0 and 359 that tells us how far around this circle we are. Like how much green is there? Come around, keep coming around, hit blue, and then back to red. You all have probably seen color pickers that look like that, right? Where it's like a circle, and there's usually like circles and triangles overlaid, and you kind of go around to pick the shade. That's based off this part. That's the U. The first number is going to be a number between 0 and 359, or between 0 and 360. Oh yeah, and I didn't write on the board, sorry. There should be commas. All these places where I'm writing blanks, there's like commas separating those. But again, we'll see this in example very shortly. The second number, the saturation, is how dense that color is. The way I like to think about it is like with spray paint. You know, if you had a can of spray paint, saturation is how closely are you holding the spray paint can, right? If I had a can of spray paint and stood way over here and sprayed it, it's going to be it's barely going to kind of mist on the board, be very thin. Whereas if I put the can almost right next to the board and sprayed, it'd be super thick and probably start running down. A very high saturation. That's what I always think of as just like a spray paint. Saturation is like a spray paint can. Think of a spray paint can and how far away are you spraying? And that'll be a percent. So some number between 0 and 1. And then the L, which could be an L, a V, or a B. V is in vacation, or B is in boy. You might see those, but they act essentially the same. Our textbook goes with the calling it lightness. Originally, it was luminosity. Personally, I like the one with the B, as in boy or box, because there it's brightness. So that last one is how bright is it, which again is a percent. Somebody came in, Natasha. And yeah, then we give some number between 0 and 1 to say that level of brightness, with 0 being off and 1 being on. So you can think of that as like a rheostat, the adjustable light switches, where you either have a knob or a slider. You know, at one end at 0%, that color is completely turned off, and at 100%, that color is completely turned on. So we can find those things by mixing those colors that way. And this is the one that artists tend to prefer, because it might seem a little confusing at first, but this is the one that with just a little bit of practice becomes very intuitive, because like I drew a circle here. Oh, hello, Latasha. We're just going over colors here, and we're going to get to some examples very shortly of using all these things. I just wanted them on the board so I can point to them. So I drew a circle, so we're going around with the U. But a lot of artists talk about thinking of it like a sphere. So then we have that 3 dimensions as well. And we can think about that saturation and lightness as colors, like a ball of color. And we can kind of pick back and forth there. It takes a little bit of practice, but a lot of people find that a lot more intuitive. And we do also have an Hsla, which again is the alpha value that tells us how transparent it is. So kind of the same thing, a number for the U, percent for saturation, how densely is that color packed in, a percent for the brightness, how the lightness, luminosity, brightness, how much light is involved in that color. And then with the A there, we also have a percent for the alpha value, which 0 is completely transparent and 1 is completely opaque. I don't remember how that here. So that is our 4 main ways to pick a color. Any questions about that? Conceptually wise, we're getting ready to look at an example, and it'll probably make a lot more sense when we see it in examples. But any questions yet?
No.
All right, so let's put something together and kind of see what this looks like. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And open up Notepad++ to get started. Let's see. I'll zoom in again. Maybe one more. So the other day we looked at starter files. So it's not a bad idea because everything is going to always have that same starting point, right? We'll start with the Doctype Declaration, which technically we could leave off right now, but in a couple years when the standards update again, if you leave that off, you have to come back and add that into every single file you left it off of, or it will stop working. So it's a whole lot easier just to go ahead and include that now. Then we have start and end HTML tags. So it says, tells the computer it's going to transmit and then reassemble a HTML document. Everything from this tag down to this tag is the HTML code. Then we'll need a head section. Oops. Which has information about the page, which we haven't seen much yet. The only information we've seen is where the style sheet will be located. We'll get to that in just a second. And then the body tag, which is what actually shows on the page. So if you wanted to, you could save a little bit of time by going ahead and putting a starter file like that together, and that way you don't have to retype that every time. Because every time you retype it, you risk a typo happening. I'm going to go ahead and save this as an HTML file. What are we in? Is this the third class period? So my delete folder. I think it's class 3. And it's .html, so make sure you type .html. Or if you prefer, you can choose it from the list here. I guess I can show you one more way. If you go to encoding, open up language, and select HTML from the language your text editor knows about, you can also do it that way. And then when you hit save, you can see in the second list down here, it's going to try to save it as an HTML file. Usually I just type the extension because when you do a lot of coding, you're often typing in different languages. So I find it more useful just to make sure I have control over what it is. But if you want to, you could change that setting, hit there, and then it'll just automatically save it as put that .html extension in, as long as you already told the text editor that that's what language you want. Let's see. Do I have room on the board? There's a picture I was going to draw. I'll just draw it here somewhere. I'll open Microsoft Paint. That's a quick, easy one. And go over the planning thing some. Y'all might remember that first day I made a note about planning. We're in a learning environment, so this is a good place to practice planning, especially like some of the things that would go in proposals that you would give to clients, even if they're trivial, or especially if they're trivial in a classroom, in particular, the timeline and the budget. You know, there's some other stuff that would go into proposal, but in the real world, when you go to give a proposal to a client, the only 2 lines they care about is when do they get it and how much does it cost. So while we're in the learning environment, that's a good place to practice that sort of plan making. And that way, when you're out in the real world bidding on jobs, you can, you'll have a little bit of practice and be better at predicting how long it's going to take and how much it's going to cost. Then if you stick with the numbers you originally give clients, they're going to be much, much happier. So I'm just going to draw a quick picture that is going to end up on the board in a moment, the wireframe diagram, sort of a method of planning out what our page is going to look like. A very basic thing, so it's usually just drawn with boxes. So we'll have this like big box to represent the overall page. And inside of that, I'm going to put a section. I'm going to put some labels here. So go back to black. Out here, this is the main. And then inside of that, this red box, I'm going to create a section to put some things in. And in particular, I'll put a couple paragraphs in that section tag. Remember, we talked about that the other day. A lot of times you can think of our tags or elements as containers that hold things. So in the main or the body of the page, you're going to load in a couple sections, and each one of the sections, I guess, will have a couple paragraphs. Oh, I'm going to, actually, instead of paragraphs, I'm going to make these articles. So inside that section tag, I'm going to put some more containers. I'll use article. That's what I have in my notes here. So like containers, inside of containers, inside of containers. Because these are things that we're going to talk about in a few minutes. Then eventually somewhere way down there, nested in there, I'll put in a paragraph tag inside each article. Maybe more than one, but I clearly ran out of room on the picture here. So paragraph. Paragraph. And might as well throw a footer in at the bottom. I'll put a yellow box. Somewhere down here. Put a footer. Yellow probably wasn't the best color for that, but I think it still probably shows a little. And obviously put a paragraph in the footer. So that's what's called wireframe diagram. Just the basic idea of the page. Whenever you have colors in mind, if you're making something for a company, you probably have like company colors or some sort of idea. Maybe they want a really dark site or a really bright site, something they would tell you, and then you can kind of line the colors up in those boxes and get a feel for how they sit next to each other. For our purposes today, I was just going to set up, that's kind of what I was thinking as far as an example, and that way we can mess with the colors on there. And then the second, after break, we're going to talk about fonts. So that'll give us something to mess with on fonts. And then one other thing to talk about there today. But that's the idea of the page we're going to make. And it can be really good practice. Obviously, in a classroom starting out, we're not doing super complicated things. But again, with that learning environment thing, it can be a really good idea to go ahead and practice making wireframes on the simple ones. And that way, when you get to super complicated pages that you would need some sort of picture to help you get everything organized, you know how to put one together and have a better sense of it. Obviously, there's much better software than this for putting that together, but you can see it only took a couple minutes in Microsoft Paint. I guess I'll go ahead and save that. I'll call it wireframe. It's a good name for it. And then I'll put that over there and that over there so we can see both of them. Whoops. Oh, I turned my little stand around, so there's something right in front of my knee now. I'll try not to bump it like that very often. So we need to implement this idea into the page. And then we'll start looking at these colors and examples. So first off, inside of the body, well, I kind of listed it here as the main. And the thing about the body tag is it has to be there, right? That's the default thing that whenever we transmit this across the internet and a browser opens it up and looks at it, it's going to look for that body tag, which means I don't really have control over that body tag. So usually the first thing I like to do is inside of the body, I will nest some sort of tag I do have control over, which basically serves the same function. It covers the entire page that will be seen, the entire viewable area, but the difference being that I have control over this main tag. I have a lot more control over that than I do over the body. And then just leave the body tag in the default issues. So I'm going to nest this main tag inside of the body. And then from the picture we can see here, from the plan, I put a section tag inside of the main. And I like to just go ahead and indent every level to help keep track of it. So I'll do a section and then a footer. Probably got extra line there. Oh, too many lines. Can I make this all fit in one page? Maybe if I get rid of this line. Well, for now, it all fits in one page. There's more stuff to go in there, so it won't all fit on the screen at once. But does that make sense for the top level stuff going from this picture over to these container tags? The ones that aren't actually going to have words, they're going to hold other tags. And again, that's something you might want to practice. It doesn't take long to put a little sketch together like that before you start putting the code together, and then get some practice at it for when you do get to the complicated things down the road, that a sketch would be much more useful. Go ahead and start with the easy ones. And then so like the picture shows, I'm going to put an article tag. I'm going to put 2 article tags. There, and then each one is going to have a paragraph in it. And then the footer will have a paragraph in it. So no information on this page yet, right? No data to transmit, just the idea. That's normally not the way I wanted to type, but I wanted to make sure and do it that way as an example. Another option for putting these together is to go through and put all the tags there, and then come back and put the words in there. Which in this case, the words are kind of arbitrary. I'm just going to put some random words here. So like, this is the first paragraph. Here is another paragraph. And a footer down here. So, yeah, that's just another option. You know all the tags have to be there. And if you start, just kind of go through like that and put all the tags in first. You kind of do have to have a plan, like a wireframe or something to get it together that way. But you can put all the tags in and then come back and throw the words afterwards. And that way you make sure you have remember all your opening and closing tags and keep track of everything that way. That part should have looked familiar, right? Does everything I did there make sense?
Yes.
We've seen that a couple times, right?
Yes.
Yeah, and I'll change it up in examples sometimes for just look at different ways things can be done. So if I go to where that's saved, the HTML document, so you can either double click on it wherever you saved it, or right click and open with. And you should be able to open it with one of your browsers. I'll just use Chrome, which runs very, very slowly during the Zoom call.
I remember mine wouldn't open. I think I didn't remember. This is just in case this happens for someone else, because remember I didn't save it 8.html, or I think that's what it was. But yeah, mine wouldn't open at first, and then I had to go back and save it. I saved it wrong.
Yeah, you do have to make sure it's an HTML file, because if you accidentally call it a text file, then all you would see on the page is the code itself. Because the browser can open a text file. Browsers know how to open several types of files. Right? Browsers can open PDFs and images, text files, XML.
I think I'm going to be doing a lot of deep.
Yeah, so like we could do a website entirely in PDFs, but there are some big drawbacks to it. There's reasons why HTML became the standard and not PDF. So there we go, just a couple paragraphs put on there, nothing really too fancy. The main thing is in these containers, because, well, we're talking about colors, so I'm going to add some colors in there, right, to kind of see what's going on. So we need a style sheet. So I'll go ahead and create a new one. And something I didn't do the other day, this is just a little tip that I picked up along the years. The first thing I always do in CSS is I'll put a tag for the HTML. And there are 2 things that I put in here. The first thing is the reason I do this, a min height of 100%. Because computers are not intelligent, and every once in a while, the computer will decide, well, I don't need the whole screen for this page. So it'll cut off background colors and stuff. And then it'll just have a bunch of big white area where the browser decided it didn't need to use that to show your page. So I always, first thing I do is tell it the minimum height for this thing is 100% of the view area. Then the other thing I do is I'll always put starting font size. I'm just going to put 12 point. That's what we're going to talk about after the break. Well, it looks like this is drug on a little bit longer than I planned it to. So after the break, we'll finish up the color stuff. But here in a little while, we'll talk about font stuff. But when this is our root font size. So that one of the ways we have to size things is by referring to the root size. So I always like to put those in to start with on a CSS page. I'm going to call it class 3. And again, we need the .css. So typically, I would recommend just typing in .css. You can also choose it from the list there. Or if you go over to, in your text editor, go to language and choose CSS from the list. See the colors changed. And now when I go to save it, it has that the type is set for Cascade Style Sheets. Class 3. And it will add the extension. But generally, I do recommend typing that extension in, because if you do a lot of coding and programming and all this, then you're gonna be messing with extensions a lot. So you probably want to have control over that. And then that thing we saw the other day, we need to link to that style sheet. Does anybody remember the name of the tag to connect to the style sheet? I don't hear any answers.
I think is it oh, see, I think I was gonna be wrong. Never mind.
Oh, what were you gonna say?
Yeah, I'll give it a shot. Well, let's see, we have link, link, let's see, we have a REL equals style is style sheet in quotes, because we got told this style sheet.
Yes, and that's relevance. So
relevance is style sheet, one word.
Yes. And it is style sheet. I think the other day in class I typed sprite sheet, which is something completely different.
Yeah, you did. You had some weird. And then the second thing is that type was in quotes text / CSS.
And this is what's called MIME type. This is not currently required because cascading style sheets is the standard. So CSS is the standard. So if there is no MIME type, it's going to assume it's CSS.
But
yeah.
If that changes, then we got to go back and fix it all. And well, I'm lazy. I won't do that. And then we finally get our reference. Href is going to be the name of this, whatever the style sheet is.
Yep, the hyperlink reference.
Hyperlink
and
reference is.
I put it in the same folder, so all I need is the name of the file.
Right.
class3.css. And then. Yeah, and I'm going to ask that when here in this class, whenever you have a standalone tag, if there's no closing tag, please put a slash there.
Someday we'll need it, right?
Yes. Every time they try to update the standard, they try to include that slash, but it would cause backward compatibility issues. So.
For good practice.
Yes, for good practice. Every other markup language, it is strictly required. So that's the main practice thing. Isaac's here, so let Isaac in. And that should link us to the style sheet now. And yeah, this one is, whoops, I forgot to hit share screen. Let me share the screen again. So we have to have the relevance and the hyperlink reference. And the MIME type, I wanted to go ahead and include that because oftentimes you will need MIME type, so I wanted to see it from the beginning. If CSS ever changes and is no longer the standard, you would have to put that in if you left it off, but it is highly unlikely that CSS will not be the standard anymore. that's what graphic designers are trained in, with CSS. So CSS has worked into pretty much every single other programming language, the front end stuff for every other programming language. So if anything, CSS is going to become part of more standards and not get taken out of them. Just another reason why everybody has to take this class and learn that, because so it's probably not going away, but for good measure and practice, remember there's the type one, because whatever MIME types always look like that. They'll say either text or bin for binary files. That's pretty much the two options, and then what it's going to be used for. But that links us to the style sheet. So just to check it, I'm going to throw something in a paragraph tag, I guess, because those first ones aren't really going to show. And we talked about this the other day. So for when we style stuff, we need a selector. We have to state what we are choosing. What are we selecting? So for a quick test, I'm going to select the paragraph tags. And then curly braces, we'll need an opening and closing curly brace, which I'll put separated like that. It does not matter how you line up your curly braces. As long as you have curly braces there, you can put it all in one line. You could put this curly brace down here. You could have several spaces there. You probably don't want to put spaces there. Avoid doing that, because we'll see here in a few minutes where spaces in that area have meaning. But a few years ago, somebody just took the time to ask thousands of programmers what the best way to put curly braces is, and the majority said this is the easiest to read. So that's why I do this in class. The opening curly brace on the same line is what it's connected to, and then the closing curly brace backed off to line up, and everything in between is indented over to make it easier to read. And then, well, hypertext markup language. The main thing here is text. So if we just say color, that's referring to text. So like color blue and background color red. So there's that name thing again. Oh yeah, and we always have the property we want to change, then a colon, the value we are changing that property to, then a semicolon means end of line. So that's like the end of that instruction. So change the text color to blue, end of instruction. Change the background color to red, end of instruction. And for CSS, it's pretty standard that any property we have, the names will be spelled out and separated with a dash. So spell it all the way out, and we can't have spaces in names, so we use dash in CSS. So that should give us some colors we can see. Probably not nice looking colors, but if I reload that, yeah, kind of hurts my eyes, but it did change the colors. So that gets us sort of a start there. And we saw named colors the other day, but we have several colors here, right? Several types that we talked about. The names, there's a long list of named colors. One of the appendices in the book has a long list of names. I usually grab it from the browser itself. So if you hit F12, or you can right click and go to inspect, either one of those will open up all this stuff over here. I have pictures in the way, so I gotta move those. And well, I'll mention it again just as a reminder. Remember, we have these elements, and when we hover over the different things here in the Elements tab, we can see what's getting highlighted. That's a very useful tool in debugging. One of the tabs will say Source or Sources, and that shows our source files, including the CSS file. And here we can type in and edit it. We can't save from here. So if you make changes here, make sure you copy them back over to the file that's actually saved so you don't lose them. But a whole lot of named colors are here. So if we just start typing, got Alice Blue, Antique White, all of those are the ones that start with an A. The colors that start with a B. Oh, if I just hit backspace, I get the whole list. So here's all the named colors. You can see it's kind of a long list. A whole lot of colors to work with. And most of us are familiar with that from when we're little kids, because these are the same names you would have seen in a box of Crayola crowns. So a whole lot of name colors. We can pick them that way. There's an appendix in the book that has the list of names, and I'm sure Google knows of millions and millions of web pages that have a list of names. There's lots and lots of reference for CSS, HTML, because I might as well throw this out here. If you haven't picked a topic yet, a very common topic for a project in a class like this would be a reference page. Right? It is an excellent project for a class like this, because then you're reinforcing all this material as that is the data you're showing on your page, and you're using it to style the stuff up. So that's why you see so many, you'll see so much reference material on the internet for HTML, CSS, and all the website stuff, because that's a common project in a class like this. It's like, oh, I can't really think of anything, so I'm just going to make a website that to serve as reference material for this subject. And it really helps to reinforce everything. The other one I said was, the next one I have on the list up here was the hexadecimal, direct control over that. So that blue and red thing looks kind of messy there, so I'm going to change that around a little. Actually, I'll try some different things. Let's add some other selectors in. I'm going to take that out of there. And we also had a section and a footer section. And might as well put the main here. So this is kind of like the method we did earlier, right, with the tags, where all of the tags are open, and go ahead and start all of them, and then just come in and fill in the colors as we need them. So that kind of works, but the thing I wanted to point out here is, notice the color change got off, right? These selectors, judging from the first two things here, should be blue. And the reason it did that is because there's no end of line here. There's no semicolon. So if I type maybe color blue here, you can see it corrected all of that. So whenever it hit a closing curly brace, before it hit a semicolon, it threw off all the color encoding, which is called lexing, by the way, Lexxing. Similar to the word lexicon, it means word. But so you do have to watch out for that if you do it this way. So the main, if we look at the HTML code, the words are in a paragraph tag. And those paragraph tags, well, up here they're in articles, or down here they're in footers. Those article tags are in a section tag, and that section tag is inside the main tag. So those elements are nested inside of each other. Or another term we use for that is child elements. The section is a child of the main. The article is a child of the section, which is a child of the main. And same thing with the paragraph. It's a child of that element. So over here in the CSS, if I put the text color up here in the main, what do you think is going to happen on these paragraphs? Will they change colors or not? Any guesses?
No.
Let's check. And yeah, it's a 50-50 guess, because they either change colors or they don't. So they did change colors, right? That's called inheritance. And so since it's in everything on this page is a child of that main element. So everything here will inherit from that main element.
Well, that's cool.
If instead of putting that there, I select that, I put it in the section tag. What about the color change this time?
Probably not.
So some of them did though,
Some of them.
right? So the paragraphs are children of the section. These two paragraphs were children of that section tag, but this one was not. So only the child. So things like the color of the text and the background color stuff will inherit that. And if we did that with the background color, it would kind of be the same thing. So I'll type background dash color. And again, there's no semicolon before that closing curly brace, so my colors are off there. I just wanted to show that style. Notice here, everything has that blue background. The entire section tag has that blue background, and which essentially makes it look like those child paragraphs have a blue background as well. If I move that down one more time, I'm going to hit Control X to cut it and paste it down here in the paragraph. See, now the paragraphs, it's only the paragraph, and we don't have the margins between them and things like that. So that's the idea of inheritance. It kind of walks down. That's cascading, like a waterfall. Right? It cascades down. So when we said the main has blue text, that style and cascaded down like a waterfall and fell over all these other tags. So then every other tag in there picked up that thing that was cascading down from the main tag. That's part of the name on there. So inheritance, you'll want to use that a lot to not have to put the same rules in every single place. Think about how it goes down. Let's see what I have on the notes for that article. And one other thing about inheritance is we can directly control it. So here, I'll put the color to yellow, probably not yellow, the background's white. So I'll put a paragraph to green, to the color green. And that changed all of the paragraphs on the tag on there, right? But we know that things cascade down. There's the elements inherit from their parent element. So we can take advantage of that. And maybe we want these paragraphs to be blue instead of green. And to do that, we can specify, it's called a Descendant Selector. So we'll specify the parent element, so like section, a space, and then a P, and that's saying the paragraph tags inside of the section tags, and there's separated by a space there. Color, I'll just throw in blue for now. And that's the thing we were talking about before class, Joe. You have to set it up that way for those things, which that particular case will show up next week, I believe. So there's still a couple more things, but it's called Descendant Selectors. So you have to specify what
I would have had my list in a section, and then I would have said section DT in my case, because it was within. Okay, I'll play with that and see if it works.
Yes. Oh yeah, you mentioned it as about lists. Y'all have probably noticed by now. Hopefully you've read it. Got started reading the books since we're already in the second week here. And I haven't wrote in the syllabus. I think I stated it the first day. I always prepare the lectures under the assumption that you have read or will read the book. So some things in lectures aren't in the book, and some things in the book aren't in lectures, but all of them are in the quizzes. So it kind of, there's both parts of it. But our textbook really, really likes lists. When you see as you read through our textbook, you'll think that lists are the go-to to do everything. And that's just that author's choice. When I learned HTML, or not initially learned it, when I took a class on HTML, list didn't even show up in the book. List didn't even rank high enough to make the book. So there is a style choice, and we can use things differently, which is what we're going to see with CSS. We have control over what these things look like. Using the HTML list element is just a suggestion to make it more useful for us so that it has some default properties of a list. But we can style anything any way we want to, and we could make any of the tags look like a list. So you'll see lists used for a whole lot of places in our textbook, but that's not necessarily, that's just the author's personal style. So that's the first note. There's just some inheritance things. Any questions about that? It fits right with the name, right? Cascading style sheets. So it cascades down. If we put the style instructions up on the main, it's going to cascade down, and all of these things inside the main are going to pick up that same style rule. Or if we put the style rule on the article, it's going to cascade down, and everything inside that article is going to get that style rule. And that's called inheritance. It'll take you a little bit of trial and error to get used to that. And sometimes we do want to directly control it. And when we do, in our selector, we space delimit the things. So the paragraph tags inside of the section. And the stuff we saw the other day with classes and IDs and names, we didn't really see how to call up names yet. We'll see that before long. Any way we have to do a selector works that way. So if we had a class name here, which we do not, but maybe say there was one like .thingy. We had a class, we said, put that class name somewhere, it still follows that same thing. So space delimits the parent and child, or vice versa. Maybe this one was the one with the class. We can put the class name, space, the child element. So whatever type of selector we're using, section, okay, yeah, that was one of those dangerous points. Like whatever type of selector we're using, it follows that same rule, just space delimit the controlled inheritance on those rules. Okay, so it's already 2:20. Been talking for a while, so why don't we take a break, and then we'll look at all of these in the example. We'll put those colors into the background and foreground colors in the example to actually see the different ones in place. Right? Oh, I need one more paragraph because we have 4 of them. Right? So 1, 2, 3, 4, and those each have 2. So I guess I'll put a couple more paragraphs in there so we have 6 different paragraphs at least. 6 different things to apply background and foreground colors on. But it's been a minute, so why don't we take a 10-minute break, and then we'll do that. See something in the chat. Oh, okay, that's fine. Yeah, so let's take 10 minutes. I need to get a drink.
Coffee.
My coffee maker gave out this morning.
Oh, no.
I woke up, started a pot, came downstairs, waited about 10 minutes. Was like, okay, there's going to be fresh coffee. But I've had it for like 3 years, so it was time.
Right.
Yeah,
Mine break like every 2 years.
Yeah. And I run coffee pots like 24/7. So yeah, let's take 10 minutes, and I will see you all at 2:33.